In the middle of a luxury first-class flight, a wealthy woman slaps a federal air marshal. But what he does next doesn't just shock the cabin. It sparks a rebellion, a standing ovation, and a moment that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about strength, justice, and humanity. You won't want to miss a second of what happens next. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get into the story. The sharp crack of a slap cut through the refined silence of first class, loud enough to arrest every conversation, freeze every sip of champagne, and tilt the delicate balance of decorum into chaos. Under the muted golden lights of an Emirates A380 bound for Vancouver, the air itself seemed to recoil. Penelope Hart, draped in luxury and entitlement as effortlessly as her cashmere scarf, stood seething over a man whose presence had been so quiet, so unassuming, that few passengers had even noticed him until now. Her manicured hand still hovered in the air, trembling slightly from the force she had just unleashed. Every line of her body screamed rage, disgust, and something older, something darker. Noah Carter, Federal Air Marshal, sat motionless. His training over 2 decades had prepared him for violent attacks, hijackings, life-and-death decisions at 30,000 feet. And yet, in this moment, the only response he gave was stillness. A thin line of blood traced the corner of his mouth, but his eyes, steady, unwavering, met Penelope's without fear or anger. They held a deeper understanding, as if he had seen this same hate before, as if he had prepared for it. A collective gasp filled the cabin, passengers frozen mid-motion. A young woman in a window seat, Sophia Ramirez, a bright-eyed university student traveling abroad for the first time, covered her mouth with her hand in shock. A businessman, holding a glass of whiskey, set it down with a soft clink. Forgotten. Even the flight attendants halted, eyes wide, unsure whether to intervene or witness. "You people," Penelope spat, her voice low but venomous, "don't belong up here. You don't deserve it." The words cut through the cabin more sharply than the slap had, laden with a history few dared to acknowledge, but all understood in their bones. Heavy, ugly, undeniable. Noah Carter blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion. His fingers brushed the blood from his lip with almost clinical precision. Then slowly, a small smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Not the bitter smile of defeat, not the angry sneer of retaliation, but a smile born of something stronger, resilience, certainty, a defiant humanity that no amount of hatred could shatter. It was that smile, not the slap, that truly broke the cabin's fragile equilibrium. A murmuring ripple began, low and tentative. Eyes shifted from Penelope to Noah. Confusion gave way to recognition, then indignation. Even those accustomed to wealth and power could feel something tectonic stirring beneath the plush luxury of first class. At the cockpit door, Captain Mason Walsh emerged, alerted by the disturbance. His keen pilot's gaze swept across the scene with trained precision. One glance at Noah was enough. Mason recognized authority when he saw it. Not the loud, blustering kind, but the quiet command that comes only from experience, from integrity. "Ma'am," Captain Walsh said evenly, his voice firm but respectful. "You need to return to your seat immediately." Penelope whirled toward him, ready to unleash another tirade, but the authority in his stance, the quiet disapproval in the eyes of her fellow passengers, stopped her cold. Color rose in her cheeks, her chest heaving with unshed arguments. But for once, Penelope Hart found no allies in the crowd, only silent judgment. She stumbled back into her wide leather seat, her hands trembling, not from anger now, but from shame. Noah said nothing. He didn't have to. The air around him said everything. It was no longer Penelope's domain. The cabin now belonged to something greater, something that had been waiting to awaken in the hearts of the silent, the sidelined, the underestimated. A reckoning. It started with Sophia Ramirez. Brave in her youth, trembling but determined, she stood up from her seat and spoke, her voice slicing through the thick, stunned silence. "That was wrong," she said, clear and unwavering. Another voice, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, echoed her, louder this time. "Absolutely disgraceful." And then, the miracle. One by one, passengers rose. Hesitant at first, then stronger. A man began clapping, then a woman, then another, and another, until the entire first-class cabin was vibrating with applause. A standing ovation, not for the violence, but for the strength it took not to answer hatred with hatred. For the quiet, immovable dignity embodied by a single man refusing to be broken. Noah did not stand to accept it. He simply inclined his head, modest, dignified, a soldier of peace. Above the clouds, under the sterile lights of a luxury aircraft, a line had been drawn, not one of anger, not of revenge, but of hope, the kind that lives when a single person chooses grace over fury. None of them could know it yet. Not Noah, not Sophia, not even Captain Walsh, that this flight was merely the beginning. That the slap, the smile, and the standing ovation would ignite conversations and awakenings that would ripple far beyond this night, far beyond this plane. And it all started here, with one slap and a smile that refused to break. The sting of Penelope Hart's slap still hung like a heavy mist in the air, a memory seared into the cabin of first class. Passengers who had once occupied themselves with wine lists and travel magazines now sat stiffly, casting furtive glances at the man who had just been assaulted and the woman who had committed the act. Noah Carter remained exactly where he was, calm, unmoving, composed. There was no trace of vengeance in his eyes, no spark of rage, only a slow, deliberate smile that seemed to defy everything Penelope had hoped to provoke. Across the aisle, Sophia Ramirez clutched the armrest of her seat. Her heart was still pounding from her small act of defiance, standing up and speaking aloud against Penelope's cruelty. She hadn't planned to. The words had simply risen in her throat, irrepressible. Now, as she watched Noah, she realized that his strength wasn't just physical. It was something infinitely harder, emotional restraint, dignity, standing tall in a world eager to strip it away. Noah turned slightly toward Sophia and gave her a barely perceptible nod, an acknowledgement, a thank you without words. Sophia felt her throat tighten with an unexpected surge of emotion. She had only meant to say what was right. She hadn't expected to feel seen. Penelope, meanwhile, sat rigid in her seat, staring straight ahead. She no longer looked powerful. She looked isolated, trapped within the walls she had built for herself. Flight attendants bustled with nervous energy, pretending to arrange service carts while throwing concerned glances toward Noah. One of them, a woman named Elise Grant, finally approached. She knelt beside Noah's seat, her voice low and steady. "Sir," Elise said, "would you like to file a report? We can notify the authorities to meet the plane when we land." Noah met her eyes with that same unwavering calm. "No need," he said simply. "I think the situation has spoken for itself." Elise hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and admiration for his grace. In the end, she nodded and stood, her respect for him evident in the way she carried herself back down the aisle. Around the cabin, small conversations started up again, but they were different now, quieter, heavier. Passengers weren't talking about meetings and vacations anymore. They were talking about what they had witnessed, about Noah's refusal to meet violence with violence, about dignity in the face of naked prejudice. Sophia pulled out a notebook from her backpack, pretending to doodle while really just trying to steady her shaking hands. She wanted to remember every detail of this moment, not because of the ugliness that had sparked it, but because of the beauty that had followed. The beauty of resistance without hatred. From her seat, Elise Grant watched Sophia and Noah, feeling a complicated knot of emotions stirring within her. She had worked dozens of first-class flights, tended to countless VIPs. She had witnessed tantrums over champagne not being chilled enough, seen entitled rage over a delay of 5 minutes. But she had never witnessed anything quite like this. A man absorbing humiliation without surrendering to it. Passengers finding their courage because of it. Captain Mason Walsh's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We'll be continuing toward Vancouver with no further delays. Thank you for your understanding." It was meant to soothe, but those who had been paying attention knew that understanding was no longer optional. It was necessary. Something had shifted. As the plane cruised onward, Noah returned to his e-reader, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But his simple act of opening the device, of reading in peace, felt revolutionary after what had transpired. Sophia found herself scribbling words into her notebook. Strength is not shouting louder. It's standing still when the world tries to move you. Penelope shifted in her seat, shrinking in the unspoken judgment of the cabin. Once adored, now pitied. Another flight attendant passed Noah and paused. "Sir," she said quietly, placing a small wrapped cookie on his tray. "Thank you." Noah gave a small smile in return. No grand gestures, no speeches, just gratitude exchanging hands silently between strangers. Later, when the crew dimmed the cabin lights for sleep, the mood softened but stayed changed. Passengers reclined their seats, pulled blankets to their chins. But more than a few left their reading lights on, as if unwilling to let the glow of what had happened entirely fade away. Sophia stared at the window, the endless night stretching outside, feeling braver than she had an hour ago. Elise, tidying a tray near the galley, found herself smiling for no reason she could quite explain. Even Captain Walsh, sitting quietly in his cockpit, thought for a moment about his own small daughter back home and what kind of world he hoped she would inherit. And Noah Carter, steady and still, carried them all forward through the darkness. One smile had done it, one refusal to break, one reminder that dignity, once shown, is contagious. After the turbulence of that unforgettable confrontation, the cabin had settled into an uneasy quiet, like the hush after a thunderstorm. Whispers filled the spaces between seats, but the energy had changed. Less gossip, more reverence. Everyone understood they had witnessed something significant, though few could articulate it. Noah Carter sat back in his seat, the overhead reading light casting a soft halo around him. His posture remained relaxed, but his mind was in motion. He had been trained to move through crises without leaving a trace, but today, whether by fate or necessity, he had become a beacon. Across the aisle, Sofia Ramirez turned a page in her notebook, her pen scratching softly. She had been journaling her travels to Vancouver for months now, recording moments of growth, fear, small victories. She hadn't expected the most profound entry to come from a moment of shared silence and moral courage aboard an Emirates A380. Elise Grant, the lead flight attendant, approached Noah with a cup of tea. No words, just a gentle offering. He accepted it with a nod, their exchange brief, but loaded with quiet respect. Sofia hesitated for a long moment before gathering her courage and rising to her feet. Moving carefully in the narrow aisle, she crossed over and sat down in the empty seat beside Noah. For a beat, they simply existed in companionable silence, the hum of the engines their backdrop. "You're the calmest person I've ever seen," Sofia said, breaking the quiet. Noah looked over, his smile faint but genuine. "It's something you practice, especially when people expect the opposite." Sofia tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. I wanted to say thank you for standing there, for not." She shook her head, words failing her. "For being better than what was thrown at you." He studied her face, the earnestness burning bright behind her words. "You stood too," he said, his voice warm. "You spoke when it mattered. That's not small." Sofia felt a flush of pride bloom in her chest. She had spoken up, yes, but it hadn't felt brave at the time, just necessary. Still, hearing him acknowledge it mattered more than she expected. "Do you always stay so composed?" she asked, almost challenging. Noah took a slow sip of his tea before answering. I have my moments, but years in my line of work teach you something important. When chaos rises, the one who stays grounded controls the storm." Sofia nodded, digesting his words. She glanced out the window, the endless night sky unfolding before them. "I think most people don't even realize there's a storm until it's too late." "Most people don't want to see it," Noah said quietly. "It's easier to pretend everything's fine until the damage is too big to ignore." Their conversation drifted, natural and unforced. Sofia shared that she was a writer, still trying to find her voice in a noisy world that often seemed to prefer silence to truth. Noah listened, genuinely attentive, never interrupting. "You already have a voice," he said when she finished. "You used it back there." Sofia smiled, grateful. Few people had ever said that to her with such certainty. In turn, Noah was vague about his job, describing it only as security work. But Sofia caught the glint of deeper stories tucked behind his measured words. He wasn't hiding out of shame, but out of necessity. Some battles were too private to parade around. They talked about cities they had visited, books that had stayed with them, the strange melancholy of hotel rooms that felt both temporary and too permanent. For a while, it felt as if the walls of the plane had expanded, creating a bubble where time moved differently. Elise passed by again, catching their conversation mid-laughter. She paused for a second, smiling at the sight of two people finding warmth amidst cold reality. It was a reminder, even for her seasoned heart, that moments of connection were always worth the risk. As the plane soared through the dark, Sophia found herself leaning closer. "You know," she said, "most people would have struck back or shouted. You didn't. You changed the whole plane without saying much at all." Noah shrugged, the motion easy. "You don't beat darkness by becoming darker. You outlast it. You light a candle and hold it steady, even when the wind tries to blow it out." The simplicity of his metaphor made Sophia's throat tighten. For so long, she had thought of bravery as loud, dramatic, attention-grabbing. Here was a different kind of bravery, steady, unshakable, almost invisible. The hours slipped by, unnoticed. At one point, Sophia pulled out her notebook again, not to write this time, but to show Noah a quote she had once copied down. "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, 'I will try again tomorrow.'" Noah read it, smiled, and nodded. That's the truth. They fell into another comfortable silence. Two strangers tethered by invisible threads of shared understanding, sailing through a sky vast enough to swallow entire histories, and kind enough to make two lives touch, however briefly. Above them, the stars blinked, ancient and impartial witnesses to every act of hatred and every act of hope. And below them, two hearts, battered but unbowed, chose hope. The intercom crackled to life, jolting the quiet cabin. Captain Mason Walsh's calm voice rolled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a minor technical issue requiring inspection, we'll be diverting to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. There's no immediate concern, but we're following protocol. Thank you for your patience." An audible sigh rippled through the cabin, a blend of resignation and unease. Elise Grant immediately sprang into action, her training kicking in. She moved down the aisle, offering reassuring smiles and quiet words of comfort. Her professional demeanor, a balm for the frayed nerves of the passengers. Sofia Ramirez clutched the armrests instinctively as the aircraft began its gradual descent. She wasn't afraid of flying. Not exactly. It was the loss of control that rattled her. The reminder that no matter how much you planned, life could always change its mind. Across the aisle, Noah Carter caught her eye. He offered a small nod, calm and steady. No words were needed. Just the presence of someone who had survived countless unseen battles was enough to steady Sophia's breath. They touched down smoothly in a light drizzle. From her window, Sophia watched the wet tarmac glisten under the floodlights. The giant plane taxied toward a secluded gate, where maintenance crews were already waiting. The announcement followed quickly. A 3-hour layover while the plane was thoroughly inspected. Passengers gathered their belongings, murmuring in irritation. But Noah remained seated, letting the rush pass him by. Elise maintained order, guiding people gently toward the terminal. Sophia hesitated, her instincts pulling her toward Noah's stillness like a compass finding true north. They ended up walking out together, unplanned, yet perfectly natural. The sterile fluorescent lighting of the terminal contrasted sharply with the rich, emotional currents still humming between them. At gate C-13, the airline had arranged a waiting area. Snacks, bottled water, thin smiles from weary airline staff. It was the best they could do. Sophia found 2 chairs in a corner and glanced at Noah. He joined her without hesitation, setting his small carry-on by his feet. For a few minutes, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the muted chaos of diverted travelers settling in for the long wait. "I hate layovers," Sophia said eventually, smiling wryly. "Feels like being stuck between lives." Noah chuckled, a low sound that warmed her in the chilly terminal. "Sometimes between is exactly where you're supposed to be." She thought about that, about how life often seemed like an endless series of transitions no one properly acknowledged. College to career, singlehood to marriage, dreams to compromises. We're always between, she realized, between who we were and who we're becoming. Their conversation flowed more freely now, built on the foundation of trust, laid in the thin air above the clouds. Sophia spoke about her writing, the struggles, the small triumphs, the fear that her voice might not matter in a world so loud. "You have something to say," Noah said simply. "That's more than most." It was the kind of encouragement that felt less like flattery and more like a recognition, like being seen. Noah, in turn, shared slivers of his own life. The endless rotations between airports, the anonymity he wore like armor, the moments when the loneliness crept in, no matter how disciplined he remained. "I chose this life," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "Doesn't mean it's always easy." Sophia understood that loneliness, the kind not cured by crowds or conversation, the kind that seeped into the bones, heavy and persistent. The minutes bled into an hour, then two. They didn't talk constantly. Sometimes they sat quietly, sharing the silence in a way that felt profoundly intimate. Occasionally, Elise passed by, checking on the scattered passengers. Each time she spotted them, she smiled softly, a silent acknowledgement of the rare connection blooming amidst inconvenience. At one point, Sophia pulled out her notebook, intending to jot down a few thoughts, but her hand froze over the page. Instead, she closed the cover and slid it away. Some moments, she realized, deserved to be lived fully, not merely recorded. As they waited, Noah taught her a simple breathing technique he used in high-stress situations. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. Slower out-breath. It signals to your body that you're safe. They practiced together, the rhythmic breathing grounding them in the present. The airport continued its endless ballet around them. Families reuniting, business travelers barking into phones, toddlers running in exhausted circles. But in their little corner, the world was still. Finally, the announcement came. Boarding for the replacement flight would begin shortly. Neither of them rushed to stand. They remained seated, savoring the dwindling minutes of an unexpected sanctuary. "You know," Sophia said quietly, "if we hadn't been diverted, we probably wouldn't have talked this much." Noah nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes the detour is the real journey." She smiled at that. A real smile, deep and unguarded. As they rose to gather their things, their hands brushed. Sophia didn't pull away. Neither did Noah. The touch lingered just a second longer than necessary, enough to say what neither dared to speak aloud. At the boarding gate, Elise handed them new seat assignments. By sheer luck, or perhaps an unseen hand, they were placed in adjacent rows, just across the aisle. As Sophia settled into her new seat, she caught Noah's eye one last time before takeoff. No words passed between them. Just a mutual, quiet understanding that something had shifted, not just between them, but inside them. Above the tarmac, as the engines roared back to life and the plane surged into the waiting sky, Sofia Ramirez closed her eyes and thought. Maybe the best parts of life aren't found on the map at all. Maybe they find you only when you're brave enough to be lost. And somewhere, just across the aisle, Noah Carter was thinking the very same thing. The city of Los Angeles sprawled beneath them, a glittering web of lights slowly unfurling as the plane began its final descent. From her seat near the window, Sofia Ramirez watched in quiet awe, her heart beating slower, steadier than it had hours earlier. It wasn't just the comfort of a safe landing she felt. It was something deeper, a shift inside her, as if some long, tense string had finally been allowed to slacken. Across the aisle, Noah Carter sat in his typical composed manner, his gaze directed toward the cabin floor. But his energy was different now, less guarded, less remote. The unexpected layover, the conversations that had filled the empty spaces of an inconvenient delay, had left their mark on him too. The captain's voice, calm and reassuring, crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Walsh. We're moments from touching down at LAX. Weather is clear, and we're right on schedule for arrival. We thank you again for your patience today. It's been a journey none of us expected." The wheels kissed the runway with a soft bump, a muted chorus of sighs and soft cheers filling the cabin. Seatbelts clicked open almost immediately, passengers eager to shed the final constraints of the journey and rush back into the familiar rhythms of their lives. But Sofia didn't move quickly. She sat there, her hands resting lightly on her lap, allowing herself to soak in the moment. She didn't want to rush this ending. Endings, she was beginning to realize, carried their own kind of sacredness. Noah caught her eye again, offering a small, almost imperceptible nod. A thank you. A goodbye. It promised not to let the fleetingness of this connection lessen its weight. When the slow shuffle toward the exit began, Sofia rose with her fellow passengers, pulling her small backpack over one shoulder. She could feel the current of the crowd pulling her forward, but still, she kept glancing back at Noah, who moved with deliberate patience behind her. At the terminal, the three of them, Sofia, Noah, and Elise, found themselves standing together, briefly suspended in a bubble of post-journey camaraderie. Around them, families reunited with laughter and hugs, business people barked into their phones, and the city's pulse beckoned them outward. Elise, ever the grounding presence, smiled warmly. "Well," she said, "I don't think any of us will forget this flight." Sofia laughed lightly, feeling the truth of the statement settle into her chest. Not for a second. Captain Walsh, now in his pilot's uniform rather than the crisp cockpit whites, passed by and offered them a brief, knowing smile. His unspoken acknowledgement, the respect for what had transpired, the way dignity had triumphed at 30,000 feet, only deepened the sense that something significant had occurred. There was an awkward moment then, where the gravity of goodbye pressed down on them. It would have been easy to offer only pleasantries, to let the bond they had forged dissolve into the busy noise of the terminal. But Noah, true to his nature, refused to let the moment cheapen. He stepped forward, pulling a small, unmarked card from his wallet. He handed one to each of them. Sofia first, then Elise. Simple, understated, just his name and a number. No ranks, no titles, no assumptions. "If you ever need anything," he said, his voice low and sincere, "or if you just want to finish the conversation." Sofia turned the card over between her fingers. It felt heavier than its weight. A key, almost. An open door. "Thank you, Noah," she said, and she meant it more than she could express in that bustling, transient moment. Elise smiled too, tucking the card carefully into her pocket. "Take care of yourself," she said. "The world needs more people like you." For a few seconds longer, they lingered, unwilling to be the first to break away. Then slowly, life began pulling them apart. Elise was the first to wave a soft goodbye, blending into the crowd toward baggage claim. Sophia lingered for a heartbeat longer, searching Noah's eyes for something. Assurance, maybe, or simply the recognition that this mattered to him too. It did. She saw it clearly. They parted without promises or dramatic farewells. Just a nod, a knowing, an understanding that sometimes the most profound connections don't demand possession or permanence. They simply exist, luminous and real, for as long as they are needed. As Sophia made her way out of the terminal, into the damp, electric air of Los Angeles at night, she felt a deep, stirring gratitude. Gratitude for the slap that had cracked open an invisible wall. Gratitude for the forced layover that had given space to a genuine bond. Gratitude for the simple, aching humanity that had stitched them all together in the least likely of places. Life would move forward. Meetings would resume. Deadlines would loom. Responsibilities would reclaim her time and energy. But Sophia knew she was carrying something now that hadn't been there before. A tenderness toward the unexpected. An openness to connection without guarantees. She glanced once more at the card in her hand, then tucked it safely into her wallet. Maybe she would call him. Maybe she wouldn't. It didn't matter. The point wasn't what happened next. The point was that sometimes, without warning, a simple human moment could reroute the entire geography of your heart. And sometimes, you didn't need to hold on to it tightly. Sometimes, it was enough just to have lived it. In the grand tapestry of life, sometimes the most profound transformations occur not through meticulously planned milestones, but through the unanticipated turbulence of a single day. For Noah Carter, Sophia Ramirez, and Elise Grant, their shared flight was meant to be an ordinary crossing from one coast to another. Yet what unfolded was anything but ordinary. It began with an act of cruelty, a slap that sliced through the sterile air of a first-class cabin. It was an act laden with generations of prejudice, a reminder that no matter how high above the earth we soar, humanity's oldest wounds remain close. But it was not the slap that defined that day. It was the quiet, powerful response to it. Noah's calm resilience in the face of hostility rippled outward, transforming shock into solidarity and anger into a rare kind of hope. In the hours that followed, what could have been just another minor incident buried under the weight of daily life blossomed into something greater. A smile, a few brave words, a standing ovation that rose from a place of shared recognition. These moments became more than reactions. They became an awakening. For Sophia, the journey cracked open a door she hadn't even realized she'd locked. The door to connection beyond her careful boundaries. She entered the flight with a polished life, perfectly managed, and landed with a new, tender vulnerability she dared to explore. Elise, too, found herself altered. A witness to dignity under pressure, she was reminded that true strength isn't shown in triumph over others, but in the grace we extend when we have every reason not to. And Noah, stoic, steady Noah, discovered that even the invisible warriors among us need moments of reflection. That vulnerability when met with respect, doesn't weaken our armor, but deepens the humanity within it. They each walked off that plane carrying more than luggage. They carried the memory of an ordinary day, transformed by extraordinary humanity. A reminder that we are not separate, self-contained islands moving through life untouched by others. We are stitched together by the invisible threads of every glance, every choice, every silent act of courage. The lesson from their story is timeless but urgent. Sometimes, life's true purpose isn't in reaching a destination. It's in recognizing the moments when life reaches for us. It's in choosing mercy over anger, connection over isolation, courage over the easy silence of indifference. It's in realizing that strength is not how loudly we defend ourselves, but how bravely we see others, even those who would see us diminished. How can we apply this today? In a world that often feels divided by anger, speed, and distraction, the greatest act of rebellion is to slow down and choose kindness, to see the humanity in the person serving your coffee, in the colleague you disagree with, in the stranger who crosses your path unexpectedly, to refuse to meet cruelty with cruelty, and instead meet it with the quiet, revolutionary power of dignity. When a delay frustrates you, when a stranger is rude, when circumstances seem unfair, pause. Choose to be the unexpected kindness in the story, because you never know who is watching. You never know when a single act of grace might cascade into something that shifts not just your day, but someone else's life. Like Noah, Sophia, and Elise, we are all travelers, not just through airports, but through moments, through each other's stories. The true journey is not always the one we plan. Sometimes, it's the one that finds us when we least expect it. If this story touched something within you, if it reminded you of the strength hidden in compassion and the beauty in the unexpected, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support fuels us to keep discovering and sharing stories like these. Stories that celebrate resilience, kindness, and the extraordinary power of everyday people. Subscribe now and join us for the next adventure. Because the next life-changing journey might be just one unexpected encounter away.